As I was preparing for this conversation, I listened to Nigel's work, the one that Michael was speaking of there, the Missa Solis, the Requiem he wrote for his son Eli. And Nigel, I just want to say, it is so overwhelming and beautiful and a stunning work of music. So congratulations for that.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Who brought you into music? Was it inside or outside the family?
Oh, very much inside. Both my parents were professional musicians. They both played in the Sydney Symphony Orchestra for many years. So I grew up with a lot of music in the house, and it was very kind of professional music. Like we never sang songs around the piano or anything. It was always rehearsal ensembles coming to the house to rehearse for a concert, or my folks taking me to symphony orchestra rehearsals or concerts as well. So so it was a kind of constant saturation. And my dad was a kind of obsessive practicer of the clarinet. Like when he wasn't playing in the orchestra, he was at home practicing for hours a day. So there's this sort of constant sound, which I'm sure was there, while I was in the womb. I was taking it in there too, I'm sure.
How old were you when you started your very earliest musical performances, Nigel?
Look, I guess I wanted a piece of the action from an early age, so I would kind of get the local kids together and form little groups, and we'd write little songs together, and I'm sure you didn't miss out on anything not being there, but it was an interesting. I guess I always had that drive to do that, and I had the obligatory piano lessons as well with some wonderful piano teachers, and. But my dad always actually discouraged me from doing music.
He discouraged you? He was a clarinetist with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, and he discouraged you from music?
Yeah, he had a kind of love-hate relationship with it, and he didn't want me to follow in those footsteps. But by the time of my, I was sort of 13 or 14, it became quite obvious that I was absolutely determined to do that, to follow in his footsteps, to be part of an orchestra, to play concertos on the stage of the Opera House just like him, that he said, okay, I give in, I'll teach you now, and we'll do it properly. And so he took me under his wing, and I learnt from him for a number of years, very intensively. We had 3 or 4 lessons a week, studying the classical repertoire of the clarinet.
Did he discourage you because you didn't think it would be a happy life?
Yes. I think he had moments of great joy performing, but I think he also, it was a bit of a millstone around his neck, the fact that he was always practicing and being told what to do by conductors that he didn't really like and stuff. So it was I could always see that he loved it and he hated it, and I don't think he wanted me to go through that.
Did he think you'd be more miserable if you didn't actually pursue it?
Did he think that I wouldn't be? I guess, he could see that there came a point in my life as a young person where there was this drive to do it, and there was nothing he could tell me to stop that. So at that point he succumbed and he said, okay, well, come with me, let's go.
Performing music, someone else's music, is one thing, and writing your own is something completely different. Talking to David, had a conversation with David Malouf not so long ago, and he was saying that when he is writing at his peak, if you like, when he's actually writing something that is very, very, it's working for him, he says it's like his conscious mind ducks out for a while, and eventually it returns. Is it like that for you, writing music?
That is the best case scenario. That's what you aspire to, to be in the zone, and the zone is a kind of dopamine-soaked stupor where nothing else matters, and you're just so focused on the work. The world could be dissolving around you, but all that matters is that next note, and following that thread of musical line. And so it's not always like that, but that's when it's going well, and that's how it is. And at the end of that process, you kind of look back and say, "Wow, did I really do that? Like, how did that happen?" So yeah, it's. So
you can be surprised then by what you've done.
Oh, sure.
You check back in.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you become quite
Where did that come from?
Where did that come from? Exactly. So it's like a magic kind of potion that you drink. It's like a bit like a drug or something. Where you
I suppose the other side of that is it discipline? Does it mean you have to get to that place, you have to work at something every single day?
You have to be very disciplined, yeah. Well, me personally, I have to spend many, many hours each day. I start early, I often work way late into the night, and just waiting for that moment. Some days it's good, other days not so good. But unless you're there ready for it to happen, it's never going to happen. So you have to leave yourself open to that possibility by being there in the chair for that moment.
I always thought Pamela Travis is the woman who created Mary Poppins. Not all that many people know. She was actually Australian. She was brought up in Queensland. She always insisted that Mary Poppins didn't come from her. It was somehow sort of out there in the ether, and she's described herself as being like a kind of radio that drew in something that was outside of her to create that. Often when I ask creative people that, they go, oh, that's just crap, that can't be true at all. Or they go, absolutely, I've always thought and felt that. Where do you sit on this issue, Nigel?
Yeah, look, for me, when I look back at my catalogue, at my work, I feel that each piece that I've written is a sum of every musical experience I've ever had in my life, bubbling to the surface and sort of being assimilated and then, coming forth. So it's like collecting all those experiences from as young as I can remember through to the present day, and somehow assimilating them and then revealing them in a different form, perhaps. So yeah, it's like some people talk about the God outside, or the internal concept of God, and if God is internal, then maybe the God of music is internal as well, and it's just but one is aware of other forces at work, that's the best I can explain that, I guess. Yeah.
You've written quite a few soundtracks, as Michael mentioned. I wonder, when you're writing any bit of orchestral music, whether it's for a film or not, is there a kind of film playing in your head for orchestral music that isn't necessarily tied to a film score at all? Or is it something much more abstract than that?
Generally speaking, writing a film score and writing a piece for a concert performance are very different disciplines. The concert work is more about how notes work, how they clash, how they collide, how they interact, how they support each other, how melodies have a tension and release, and just the microcosm of the world of those sounds that you're working with. And I don't have any visual impression at all, usually. Obviously with film, you're there doing a function, you're supporting the narrative, you're working in close collaboration with the director, and you have to help the director to realise their creative vision by supporting everything about what's on screen. So it's a completely different part of the brain, in a way.
Is it more fun to do it that way, to do it without the director or with the film?
I actually love both. I mean, they both have the the good points and bad points. Great to work with a director who you get on with, and you have a mutual respect, and you share the same vision. Not so great if you get other producers involved who don't think it's working and they want you to change everything, and I mean, which is becoming quite common as film music becomes sort of corporatised, and the pressures that surround the process of filmmaking and the money that's at stake. People get quite nervous about things like music, and they want to put in their 2 bobs worth, and that's the lot of the film composer, to take that on board and to be able to work with that. When you're left to your own devices, it's entirely up to you whether you screw up, and you're your own boss, which is great. But I do love the collaborative process of working with other people in the context of film.
I mentioned the Missa Solis at the beginning. What form did that take initially in your first version of that?
It started life as a film score in the year 2000 for a wonderful IMAX film called Solamax, a film about the sun, about the scientific and religious aspects of the sun. Directed by a guy called John Wiley. I've done 4 movies with him now, and so it began as a fairly substantial film score and something that I regard as probably amongst my best work for the screen. And then the Melbourne Symphony wanted to commission that film score and turn it into a concert suite, for live performance with orchestra and choir. And that was like stage 2. And then stage 3 was the taking of all that material and expanding it even further into something much more substantial for the Requiem for Eli.
So there's this interregnum now in your life. How were you told about Eli's death? From what I understand, Eli was at a convenience store. There was an incident there. A woman who was under the influence of drugs and alcohol ran over him with a car, essentially, and killed him. How were you told of this?
I was rung by my son Joel on his mobile phone. He was underneath the car holding Eli's hand, and he just said, Eli's dead. And of course he was so distressed, and the phone cut out, and I didn't even know where he was, and we tried to ring him back, and he said, I'm at St Leonard's, and it was about 3:30 a.m. On a Saturday morning, and of course we just drove. We didn't know where we were going. We just drove down the Pacific Highway, and we got to St Leonard's, and we could see flashing lights, and that was we just said that's where. He died.
It's such an awful and senseless death. How did that? Obviously, there was a funeral, there was a court case, there was a lot of grief. How did it affect your creative life? How did it affect your work?
I really could not work for about a year. I mean, I guess writing music is a bit different to going maybe to your average day job, perhaps, because you really have to plumb the soul and really get inside yourself to be able to seek out creativity in a sense. And my mind was completely obsessed with memories of Eli. It was like I was keeping them under lock and key in my mind, and anything else was a distraction. I literally could not bring myself to work. I felt that my career was over. I had nothing more to say. Nothing mattered anymore. And it was only after about a year of that I kind of realised, well, it's actually a bit late to retrain. There has to be a way back into music somehow.
You referred to that period as, you said you felt something called the call to silence. The call to silence is a very interesting phrase. What did you mean by that?
It was a year of meditation, I guess, in my own way. I mean, I don't follow any prescribed meditation procedures, but it was just a time where my wife and I were together for the whole time, trying to look after each other and spending as much time with our son as we could, our remaining son Joel. And music shut down within me. I wasn't hearing it in my head. I didn't feel a need to express it. I couldn't listen to it.
You've been called away from it by the sound of things then. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, pretty much. It just held no relevance at all. People would send me CDs of stuff to console me, and I would listen to it, and it would just make me angry. And everything I listened, if I happened to hear something on the radio, I just had to turn it off. I mean, it was a call to silence. I can't explain it any clearer than that, and I don't quite understand where it came from, but it was interrupting those thoughts of Eli, those memories, the remnants of the time that I'd spent with him was all that I had left, and I was just hanging on to that, grasping,
The awful thing in those times is that the day-to-day crap of life doesn't go away. There's email, and there's this and that. How were you dealing with that?
Well, we actually we had a little boat which we just set sail literally on the ocean and headed up the east coast of Australia for about 8 months or so, and just got lost really in amongst the Great Barrier Reef. I mean, we knew a bit about navigation and so on. So
that's how you got off the grid, was it? The grid and...
Yeah, I mean, we were still in contact with people, but yeah, it was a very isolating time, and we'd seek out areas of complete seclusion where we couldn't see anyone, and we'd go ashore at night and wherever we could and build shrines to Eli's memory, and we'd take a bit of incense and a candle and light it and row back to the boat, and at night, be able to see the shrine from the boat still alight, till the early hours of the morning. And yeah, it started off as little shrines with bits of shell and coral and twigs and so on, and by the end of the trip, they were sort of these massive cairns on the top of mountains, with a picture of Eli embedded in them, and it became still don't quite understand what drove us. I guess it was to somehow have a kind of physical representation of Eli that we could be with and we could make, and it would be a tangible piece of evidence. And of course some of those shrines would have got washed away on the tide or in the cyclones, but there'd be a few of them that would be surviving, and maybe I'll go and visit them one day.
Did it help you talk to him?
Yeah, I did. That was something we did. My wife would quite often come with me. Some of the really intrepid treks up mountains, she kind of missed out on those ones. But we would always get together and light the candles together and say prayers and so on. So yeah, I did.
Sometimes in those circumstances, people find there's this awful other thing that takes over, where some of the people around them who'd been friends, they become a bit allergic to you because they're worried they're going to catch your misfortune or something. Did that happen to you?
Oh yeah. I felt like a pariah, and it's a very difficult thing. And a lot of people talk about this who've experienced similar things. Death is almost a disease. People don't want to know about it, and they don't know how to respond. And it's very confronting for them to speak with you, and it's very difficult to deal with that. And it's only, and particularly when you're in that first year, when you are so vulnerable, your heart feels literally broken, and it's very difficult to negotiate the world. And things like going to concerts or meetings or anything like that. People see you coming, they turn around, and people you've known for a long time. Yeah, it's a very strange thing. I think there's a denial of death, there's a denial of mortality in our society, and that's very much played out in this sort of situation.
A friend of mine died not so long ago, and it wasn't really a funeral, it was kind of a ceremony for him. And it was an odd thing because he was a young man when he died, and everyone was just trying to gloss over the fact of there's something awful had happened, something really awful had happened. This young guy had died. And no one was addressing that. It was, it's okay, we want to celebrate his life, it's all fine, he would want us to be happy. And it felt there's this kind of strange discomfort with acknowledging the kind of awful fact that something has gone badly wrong here. Did you find that too?
Well, certainly in the sort of day-to-day circles and, in the neighbourhood where we lived and so on, that was that sort of repellent, you sort of had that repellent effect on people. But look, I've got to say as well, we also had very close friends and a lot of friends of Eli's who came to be with us and who have become close friends of ours now.
They stayed in your house for a while too, didn't they?
Well, they did. The day that he died, everyone sort of gravitated to our house, and we had it became a haven for people. We had young people living there, sleeping at night, and just helping out during the day, and all helping with the preparations for the funeral. So we created this community, or a community was created around Eli's death that was the most unusual and fascinating experience for us. It was, extraordinary, very powerful. People who really loved Eli and just in total disbelief at what had happened. And yeah, at night we'd all get together and tell stories, and at one moment someone would be telling a funny anecdote about one of his pranks, and then the next moment everyone would be in tears because what had brought us together was cast its dark shadow over the proceedings. So I think death really sorts out the chaff from the wheat in terms of your friends and acquaintances. There's no doubt about that.
So after this year of heeding this call to silence, what changed?
Well, I felt, firstly, that I had to return to music because I couldn't really do anything else. That was a kind of practical consideration. And then I also felt very driven to write a musical, a prayer in music for Eli, if you like, a tribute, a requiem. And so that was kind of my first task, to do that. And that allowed me to resume the process of writing music while still retaining memories of Eli. So it was kind of like a kind of transitional piece, which, having completed that, then gave me permission to be able to do other pieces, if you like.
What was working on reworking, I should say, the Mr. Soltis like for you then in this new context as a kind of requiem for your son?
Yeah, it became a daily prayer for Eli. I mean, it was a very long process. It went on for 12 or 18 months. And each day I would get consumed in the process, and I would work with Eli looking over my shoulder and make musical decisions that I know that he would like. And include.
Really? You felt you could intuit that?
Well, I knew his taste in music, and I knew, yes, he'd want me to keep that in, or he'd need that bit extended, or he'd want more percussion here. And yeah, very much so, Richard. I mean, and so it was my way, because his life was taken through such violence and such an awful act. I felt that in order to imbue it with his death with some dignity, then this process had to be undergone. I had to somehow find dignity for his death and rest for his soul, because I was aware that there was a great deal of restlessness around the fact that he died. I don't think he wanted to die. I'm not sure that he was ready for that. And I know I certainly wasn't ready for him to die. And there's certainly a lot of restlessness within me. And to kind of exercise that through music seemed really the only thing I could do for him as a father, as a kind of last, gesture, perhaps.
Last night there was a fundraiser here for your project called the Smugglers of Light. It's a project you set up with your wife. What is that, and where does the name come from?
The gates of darkness shall never be closed to the smugglers of light was a quote written in the funeral guest book at Eli's funeral by one of his mates. And I didn't know who wrote it for a while, and I eventually found out, and it turned out it was one of the guys who was with him the night that he was killed, a young man called Toby Finlayson, who has been very proactive for the last 10 years or so in advocating social reform and reconciliation in Indigenous communities. And as were a number of people who were with Eli that night. And so there was a kind of feeling amongst the young people that they wanted to create a memorial to Eli of some sort. And so my wife and I suggested that we form this foundation, of course not having any idea what we were getting ourselves into. But we've had a lot of help along the way, and a lot of help from APRA, the Australasian Performing Right Association, who are actually partners of the organisation. And so we send teams to Indigenous communities, and we try to get the young people to reintroduce them to their roots through the community elders. And we have Gail Marbo helping us, the daughter of Eddie Marbo, and she's become our patron and cultural advisor. And she goes on the road with our team, and together they create a film and piece of music about their culture, about their future aspirations, about stories of their community. And we found that it's as simple as it is, and it's given these young kids tools to feel empowered and creative and expressive, and get re-engaged with literacy and education.
Did you think for a while that Eli's death was going to rob you of the possibility of happiness?
Well, that certainly was the case for the first year, and in fact, probably the first 2 years. But I got to the point where I thought there's two roads to take here. One can be a victim and feel why me, for the rest of my life, feel angry and carry that around, or one can look to this experience as a catalyst for change and an embracing of the qualities of compassion and empathy. And through introductions to Buddhism, I'm not a practicing Buddhist by any means, but we do have a lot of Buddhist friends, I was just overcome by the generosity of spirit of so many of our friends and family, and I then made a conscious decision, and I think my wife Janice also, that we now have to seek those moments of I won't say happiness, but fulfillment in everything we do, in our work, through the foundation, in every aspect of life. I think we're now very conscious about seeking those precious moments, and hearing the Requiem performed live at the Maya Music Bowl, the premiere a couple of years ago with the Melbourne Symphony, was a kind of turning point. Part of the Requiem embodies the writings of Sogyal Rinpoche in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and he actually came to the concert, and just to hear that music come alive, and that was kind of a turning point for me. It was a moment of great joy, and I was sitting in the audience with my wife on one side and my son Joel on the other, and we just held hands for the whole thing, tears streaming down our cheeks, and it was I just thought, well, maybe there can be joy beyond what's happened. Maybe there can be these moments, and so now we seek them out. We're pretty proactive in trying to bring them about, make them happen.
I've seen the footage of you conducting the Sydney Symphony Orchestra in the Missa Solis, and watching you conduct is extraordinary. It's so passionate and powerful, and it actually looks like you're trying to summon Eli. What is actually in your mind? Can you surrender yourself to all of your feelings about him while you're in that process of conducting?
Well, I was invited to conduct that performance by Richard Gill, who I'm sure a lot of people know through his work on television and so on. He was one of my first composition teachers, and he also taught Joel and Eli music at the Sydney Conservatorium. So we had a deep family connection, and it was he who was responsible for programming the Requiem in Sydney at the Opera House. And he was actually scheduled to conduct that concert, but he offered the baton to me. And I hadn't had a lot of experience conducting. I'd done a little bit, but I was determined that, I've worked enough in orchestras as a musician to know that they look to the conductor for guidance and stability, and you can't be vulnerable up there on the podium. You have to really
have authority.
You have to be bulletproof. And so I sought the advice of Maestro Ben Northey, the conductor here of the Melbourne Symphony, who's a good friend of mine, and I said, he conducted the premiere of the Requiem, and I said, Ben, teach me how to conduct this thing. And we had a couple of wonderful sessions where he literally took me through every bar, and we sort of choreographed this conducting routine. And he taught me how to practice the whole process, which is another story in itself. And so when I got up on stage, I was aware of very deep emotions within the orchestra. I could see some of the players in tears, in fact, during the actual playing. But I had to steel myself and be absolutely confident and very full of authority. And of course, at the end of the concert, it was another story completely. But while I'm on the podium, I couldn't get carried away with the music. I just had to direct the players to do their job, and what a job they did. And it was really very powerful. They played the arse off it.
Absolutely, and what a job you did as well. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Nigel Westlake.
Thank you.